Hello and welcome to Vivid Mini Mods. Today we'll be making the Lord of Rot, the Monarch of Decomposition, the Ruler of Corrosion, none other than the Daemon Prince of Nurgle. What makes this Daemon Prince even more special is that he will be corrupted from the golden son of the Emperor, Roboute Guilliman. I started by gluing together the Guilliman model, except for the waist and the base, and leaving off the head. This will make it easier to work with, as this is a large and detailed model. By leaving the chest and legs separate, I'm able to reposition him as I want. What I'm going to do is alter his pose slightly to give him a hunched over stance to show how the corruption has warped his body. To do this though, I'll need to trim away at his stomach. I cut the top part of the belt buckle. I also remove part of his abs. Don't worry too much about how rough it looks. We will be covering it with something far more grotesque. With this section removed, it looks quite a bit different from the grand stature of the original sculpt. But before I start gluing together, we need to turn our attention to the wrist-mounted weapon. Looking at the datasheet for the Nurgle Daemon Prince, is able to take a plague spewer, so I'll be using a proxy taken from the Death Shroud Terminators. The plague spear gauntlet fits right in with the wrist mount on this model. The main problem with taking a heroic model such as Guilliman with this conversion is that his armour is littered with imperial iconography, from the ultramarine symbol on his knee to the Achilles on his shins. These will all have to go, along with all his purity seals. We can have anything on our Daemon Prince that will give any hints to ties to the Imperium. I will however keep some of the gilding around the edges, as this gives the model a sense of decorum and high stature. Whilst carefully scraping away at the armour, it is important to have good knife control. I'm holding the dull side of the blade with the nook of my finger and using my whole hand to slowly eat through the model. My thumb is also close and touching the blade at some points to ensure that it does not slip away from me. When possible, I use sliding, slicing motions rather than applying pressure, allowing for the blade to do most of the work, reducing my chance to cut myself. Once I finish cutting the details off, I turn the knife around and scrape across the surface to flatten it out. But I could have left the surface rough and ragged, as I'll be doing some more damage to it later on to make it look more in keeping with Nurgle. With the legs done, I move on to the torso and begin removing the iconography the same way. Hopefully when this is done, people will need to take a closer look to know this is made from Roboute Guilliman. So, with one of his weapons taken care of, we turn our attention to the Hellforged sword. Now you could keep it as this flaming weapon forged from the pits of damnation, but being Nurgle, I was looking at something a bit more virulent. So I will be flipping the sword upside down and turning the flame into dripping blood from the slayed foes. I carefully slice through the blade of the hilt with a pair of clippers and glue it back, being mindful to ensure that it remains straight. Okay, so with the weapon taken care of, I return to the body and finally glue the torso to the legs in this hunched over position. I use plenty of glue as there are very few contact points, and until I reinforce it with milliput, they are the only things that are holding this model together. To add to the Nurgle look of this mini, I take the bell from the noxious Blightbringer and add it to his backpack, dangling over his head. This is one of my favourite parts of the Death Guard kit, and I've been holding on to this bit for such an occasion as a Daemon Prince. I know some people have mentioned that having a giant bell above your head looks a bit goofy and completely impractical in the battlefield scenario, but I'm just in love with the idea of the deafening knell sounding across the field, striking fear into the hearts of the enemy as the never-ending tide of pestilence pours over them. I then position the sword downwards to sell the effect of viscera dripping from the blade, before moving on to the shoulder pauldrons. I snip away the pre-fit knobs and trim them down slightly so that the pauldrons from the Chaos Lord kit fits right in. Now onto the wings, something that the resin Daemon Prince of Nurgle does not have, and one of the most kit-bashed pieces of the Death Guard army in my opinion. Looking at pictures online, nearly every kit-bashed Daemon Prince of Nurgle has these wings, and my own being no different. The giant wings from the plague drones are perfect for the prodigal son of Nurgle. Luckily, the backpack is spaced a little away from the body, which gives enough room to fit the wings in comfortably. These wings are very insectile, and on the finished model they make me think of a butterfly rather than a regular fly. I have another set of these, and maybe I will make a Slaanesh Daemon Prince in the future and paint it like a brightly coloured butterfly. But as this is Nurgle, he must be gross, grimy and gangrenous, so the intense colours will have to wait. To help fill in some of the gaps, I take the small cloud of flies from the Death Shroud kit and glue them into the holes left by the wings connecting to the body. All these gaps will be filled later on with milliput, but since these are large and I have these bits spare, there is no harm in adding a little more spice to the model. Now, whilst most kit bashers use the fly head from the Plague Drones kit on their Daemon Prince, I thought I'd mix things up a bit, taking the head from one of the riders instead. One of the reasons for this is that I've seen many long trunk Daemon Princes. One of my first conversions back when I started the hobby was to add the fly head onto a Daemon Prince. Another reason is that I have something special planned for his stomach, and I did not want to be instructed by the long trunk of the fly. This head is also roughly sized of Guilliman's original head, which you can keep with the model. I pack in the holes with some milliput to give it something to sit on and then trim away the excess. With the milliput out, I begin filling in all the gaps, starting with the largest one on his back. Once packed in, I roughly draw the lines of the connective armour. This part of the model is relatively hidden, so fine detail is not needed. Now onto my favourite part of the model. When I was coming up with ideas for this mini, the stomach was something that always stuck with me. My first iron was Death Guard, and I remember painting the Lord of Contagion, wondering what all those wires were doing hanging in front of his stomach. With the pulver's weapon in the way, it was hard to make out what I was painting those years ago. But being new to the hobby, I didn't know how dark and grotesque the Death Guard were, so I painted them all black and keeping with the rest of the pipes and wires. It wasn't until I started looking at other people's paint jobs that I realised that they weren't wires at all, but intestines hanging from his gaping wound across his stomach. I filled my Lord of Contagion by making him look less disgusting than was intended, so to make up for it, I decided to dedicate the centrepiece of this model to my foolishness. My Daemon Prince will have his stomach torn asunder and his entrails exhibited for the world to see. After sculpting the belly, I gave the first satisfying stab into the centre of it. I then began the delicate process of hollowing him out, using larger and larger ball tools to create the bigger space, and then switching to my sharper tool to sculpt more of the detail, giving it a look that his stomach is being ripped open. With the belly torn open, I moved on to the obligatory past spoils that every Death Guard conversion has. Using rolled up balls of milliput, I dot them on areas that seem a bit flat or plain. For the gore in this model, such as the viscera dripping from his sword and the slime oozing from his plague spewer, I use UHU glue. It is a wonderful invention that creates these strands that look like dripping blood when they're stretched. It takes a little getting used to in order to achieve the best results, but I've seen people use it for blood and slime, but also saliva, that work especially well on the orc squigs with their large open mouths. When this stuff dries, it is relatively tough, but it's best if you don't make long strands like I'm doing on the plague spewer. I didn't realise how bad it was until I picked up the model the following day. For the base, I want to add a little something to the already Scenic sculpt, something that shows off the destruction of the Death Guard. I've been playing with the idea of using hot glue in different ways. One of them was as flames. To make these, I took some cotton buds or Q-tips and pulled them apart into long strands. These will make the foundation for the flames. I then coated the cotton tip with hot glue and began shaping it. You can use tools, but for this I found the best results is to brave it and use my fingers on the gooey glue. This tool requires a bit of trial and error, and more than a few blistered fingers to get right. If any of you have used hot glue before, then you must have touched it at least once before it was set, that the bond liquid stick to your skin like napalm. As a compromise, I now tend to use tools to manipulate the glue until I can feel it harden slightly. I then go on my fingers once it's cooled down enough to touch without burning myself. This can get pretty messy very quickly, and it is as infuriating as it is fun to play around with this crazy medium. You can get interesting and sometimes realistic effects with it, and sometimes it comes when you least expect them, just prodding and pulling until something takes shape. Once they're all cooled, I snip them off at the base, ready for glue into my model, at which point my camera decided it was drunk. The following day the milliput was dried, so I began creating the guts and intestines and dripping entrails, all things Nurgle. Rolling some milliput into long strands, I began building up the prince's innards. When I started getting into the hobby, I took a look at all the armies to see which one appealed to me most, and honestly, I did not like Nurgle. The fat, bloated look of the grit and clean one put me off for a while. It wasn't until I bought my first army box, the Dark Imperium, and I saw the Death Guard, that they began to appeal to me. Even then I liked the idea of kit bashing, before I truly knew what it was. But the idea of these Frankenstein monsters with guns was more interesting than clean and perfect space marines. Like I mentioned before, my very first conversion was the Daemon Prince. Because Death Guard was so unique, each model looked different to the next. Hell, even the Plague Marines don't look like one another. And so, as they're expanding to add mech and necrons, Death Guard's always had a special place in my heart. I could just slap together a bunch of body parts and call it a new model. Now, back to that plague spewer. You can see my problem with it. The UHU glue is just too fragile on its own. You need something to support it when it's this long. To do that, it was a piece of fishing line. I cut to the right size and glued to the end of the weapon. With this as the foundation of the ooze, I begin building it back up again with UHU glue. And since I have some fresh glue, I can add some to the guts too. With the majority of the model complete, I can add the finishing touches by pockmarking the armour using a rotary tool. I just drill little divots into the armour panels that look a little too boring. Finally, before painting it, I crack open the crackle paint. Usually I apply this after priming the model, as the idea is better, but for some reason my black paint just doesn't seem to work well as the white. As you can see, the texture paint just forms bubbles rather than sitting flat in the mini. Once it is dried, it will give a subtle cracked texture to the armor panels, making them look old and worn out for years of battle. And with that, the conversion is complete. Let's jump to the turntables and look at the painted model. So while we look at the finished mini, I just want to give a big thank you to everyone who subscribed to this channel. With this video coming out, we've just passed 100 subscribers. That's a big milestone on YouTube, as with the 100 subscribers, I'm able to get a custom URL for the channel. So you no longer see a random string of numbers and letters in the URL, but vivid mini mods. This will allow more people to see the content. But to all you subscribed now, or those who like and comment, I just want to give a huge thank you. This channel is a niche within a niche for people who are interested in tabletop gaming, and then those who like Warhammer, and then those who like converting their minis. I can never imagine that you would all enjoy my videos so much, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Hopefully you can see my editing and audio skills improving as I approach 1 year on YouTube. I love converting models. Sometimes I have so many ideas that I cannot create them fast enough, and other times I make things that just don't look good enough to upload. I've already got plans to make some more dark mechanical models, as well as a cool idea for Foul Blight Spawn from a story I read online about a Half-Life 2 beta enemy. I would however love to hear from you guys. What would you like to see created? What are your favourite armies? And do you have any models that you think will need a good old kit bash before they're suitable for tabletop play? Anyway, that's it for this video. Until the next one, I'll catch you all soon.